Hey, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to our weekly privacy chat where myself and some of the other FPF team chat with some of the interesting leaders and touch on some of the interesting issues that have happened of the past week. I'm joined by Gabriela Zanfir-Fortuna, our global privacy lead, who will introduce our other participants. Gabriela reminded me that this week is a particular landmark when it comes to the GDPR. Many of us had big celebrations. Was it already a year or 2 years ago? We did a big event with the European delegation to the US in Washington at the, I guess that was the second anniversary. Was that when we had this big fuss? Second anniversary of the effective date. So for lots of organizations who really only cared, when do I actually risk sanctions? This was the very big focus, and that's fine. It's a good way to remind people that it's 2 years in that you are actually already at risk of legal penalties. So what are you waiting for if you haven't done the necessary work? So that's fine. There were celebrations in Europe and certainly in other places in the world. There really wasn't much celebrating happening in the US. You would think that maybe people wanted to forget about it or didn't see the notion as something worth celebrating. We certainly did, even if you want to debate, as we will, exactly could this be different or this be better, the global influence and the effort and the legislation that's been kicked off and the practical compliance. Certainly this has been such a seminal event. So we called up the delegation and we said, what are you doing here at the embassy, right? It's not technically an embassy, so we're not supposed to call it an embassy because it's the European delegation. It's not a country, this and that, but it's the embassy. And we said, we should do something together. They said, really? In Washington? You want to do something to celebrate the GDPR? So we did, and it was a lovely event. We even gave the ambassador a pillow that had, GDPR. He looked at it. He wasn't sure what to do with it. It was a fabulous event. But Gabriela pointed out that there was a maybe more important date that we were approaching. And Gabriela, let me hand to you for a quick introduction of our panelists and also why we thought that this week was a very key time to talk about an anniversary of the GDPR.
Thank you so much, Jules, and hello everyone, and especially a big hello and even a hug for our guests today. I'm very happy to see them. So we are joined by Ralf Bendrath, who back in the day was the legislative assistant of Jan Philipp Albrecht, the MEP, who was the rapporteur for the GDPR and who had a very long battle to battle. Now he continues to work for the European Parliament. He works for the LIBE Secretariat. Actually, the LIBE political. You can clarify that for us, Ralf, in a moment.
Yeah, I don't work for the Secretariat of the committee, but for the Greens group in the European Parliament.
Indeed. We are also very lucky to be joined by Karolina Mojzesowicz, and I always hope to pronounce your last name correctly, Karolina. Karolina,
perfect.
Back in the day, just like today, was working for the European Commission for DG Just, and also today with us is Jan Bowman. Back when the GDPR was being negotiated, he was a part of the DAPIX subgroup, negotiating the text on behalf of the UK for at least half of that time. Currently, Jan is a senior principal with Promontory.
Gabriela, we have to start with the most important thing. Jan, tell us about your tie.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you, Gabriela. It's a real pleasure to be here. The tie, the first time I've worn a tie for about a year, I would say. is not any old tie. It just happens to be a stunning green tie, which was given out to delegates in the Council of the EU. I don't know if you can see that. It was for the Irish presidency in 2013. So it says here EU2013.ie. So I'm not sure if that website still exists or not. But I've actually got a collection of these ties. Each 6-month presidency of the Council gave the delegates, depending on whether a male or female, a tie or a scarf. So I've got a selection of these. The reason I chose Ireland, apart from the fantastic colour, it's really startling, is I think the Irish presidency in the first half of 2013 was the one where the GDPR negotiations really got going in earnest. We spent a year previously in the Council, in the DAPIX working group, talking a lot around fine details of texts and so on. And I think the Irish presidency, chaired by someone called Seamus Carroll from the Department of Justice in Ireland, really decided to sort of take the negotiation by the scruff of the neck and kind of force the delegations into actually taking action on this. And one of the reasons I do remember it is a couple of reasons. One is there were numerous meetings in the working group at the time. There was about 27 days of working group meetings in a 6-month period. So that's working days, which meant that all the delegations had to travel to and from Brussels. Some of those meetings were 3 days long, which 3 days reading GDPR text, listening to interpreters through your headphones and so on is rather demanding. But I think there was also a couple of other memorable moments. There's a famous picture of someone, one of the delegations set up a tent in the middle of the room, simply because, I think their rationale was, if they're making us work here so much that we might as well just all sleep in tents. So that made the newspapers in Ireland and Germany at the time. But also, I think, out of all the members who'd been working together for a year, there was a kind of crystallization of the camaraderie that everyone had. So apart from being professional colleagues, I think a lot of us ended up being, good friends. And I've got lots of friends from those days who I still keep in touch with. And of course, some of them have moved on to bigger and better things since then as well.
Well, it's great to make friends, particularly in this world of data protection, where this morning, Kate Crawford, prominent AI expert, was making the point on Twitter, forget about ethics, it's about power. It's about power. And obviously, it's easy to talk about legislation. It's easy to talk about ethics. It's hard to talk about giving up power if you're a powerful company or you're a powerful government. That comes with conflict. Speaking of conflict, Karolina, did you get a tie? Did you get a scarf? Did you sleep in a tent? What? Or only bruises and scars? What did you carry away that you still have? Any awards, mementos? What do you have on your shelf from those early days?
Hello, everybody. What did I take away? Indeed, I think I do have some scarves, but not from the Irish and not from the Italian presidency, because I joined the process a little bit later. I was coming from a completely different world, competition world, and just for the negotiations of some of the provisions in the GDPR, this experience was found to be very useful. What I remember, for me, the most memorable moment is actually not the 23rd of April, but a cold evening in Strasbourg, in end of 2015, and this is actually where, for me, it was done. So a little bit earlier. It's when the trilogues ended, and when we had the feeling that we managed it. So I still do remember this incredibly long day of the negotiations. And then an evening where I left with one of the colleagues, because all the other teams still stayed to finish the negotiations on the police directive. And we all met afterwards, and we couldn't believe that it actually happened, that it was true that we are there. because everybody will remember that there were actually two moments which, in particular in the Council, were really marking the whole process, the whole decision and the discussion which was going back and forth on regulation versus directive, which for the member states and those who are listening to us who are from the member states, the difference is very important, and the impact of the harmonization is enormous. And then the second big issue, the whole package about public sector, and what led then to the shape of Article 23. But so the scarves, the no tent, few scarves. I should have thought about it. It's really, John, I should, we should have talked. You should have given me the idea. It's so nice that you had the tie with you.
If you were sleeping in a tent, the I Heart Privacy FPF socks, I think, would have come in critical.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I'll bring some over.
Would have been useful, and on this cold evening in Strasbourg also.
Ralf, the exact date, we are here on the 23rd because this is when we do our weekly show, but the precise date, I think, since you were pointing out, is when was the actual, I guess, the vote would be the final date? What's the actual period that we ought to be looking to?
Actually, there was never a final vote, unfortunately, in plenary in the European Parliament, which is really sad, because I would really have loved to see the screenshot of the big display in the plenary chamber where you can see, like, okay, 98% of the members vote in favor or something like that. We never got that. And the reason is because in the committee stage before plenary, less than 10% of the members voted against. I think it was only two, Axel Voss and Anna Maria Corazza-Bildt, I think. And if you have less than 10% of the members in committee vote against an instrument, then the rules in our house are that the plenary vote does not happen. It is just announced in plenary, and if no group requests a vote or tables amendments, then it is deemed adopted. I find that really strange, because a full parliament should always vote in the end, at least on legislative acts, but that's how our rules are, so we never got the final vote. But we had a vote already in plenary for the first reading in 2014, because we needed to carry it over the European election in 2014. And there, I think we had like 98% in favor. If you ask me about scarves or ties, I didn't get any of those, because my boss, Jan Albrecht, got those, of course. But if you had told me before, I would have put on a shirt and taken my NSA tie out of my wardrobe, which I got from a colleague from US Congress.
Okay, you mentioned the NSA. Here's my question. Here's my question to those of you who are on the ground. Now,
sorry, Jules, if I may, just one thing I still took away from this. No bruises, certain memories, of course, some friends, but I also got an entry in the Internet Movie Database.
Democracy, for those of you who are watching who haven't seen it, does a wonderful job for those of us who really appreciate the day-to-day drama. Well, here's the question I always wanted to ask you when I saw the movie. Do you think it accurately, a movie never really tells the true story. It's always the view of the filmmaker. Do you feel it really captured properly the real spirit of what was going on?
Yes, I think it captures it very well. Of course, it's a super condensed version. It's 90 minutes or 100 minutes, and the process went over 2.5 years. No, 1.5 years until the movie ends. So lots of details and nuances and also events and moments are not in the movie. That's clear. But the whole process, how it works, how you negotiate with the other political groups, how you do night shifts in Jan's kitchen back then sometimes, or in my garden or whatever, to really draft amendments and go through the almost 4,000 amendments and all that. How sometimes negotiations get stuck and become difficult. That's pretty well reflected. I'm not exactly sure about the impact of Edward Snowden, because, I mean, we didn't have an alternative reality without Snowden to test it. But the movie gives the impression that only because of the Snowden revelations in June 2013, the parliament finally managed to find an agreement. I think we would have found an agreement anyway. either way. That's how the parliament works. Some call it the sausage machinery, which always produces some sausage in the end, and nobody knows what gets into it. But maybe Snowden helped in the regard that when the Snowden revelations happened, even the conservatives had understood that they cannot possibly vote against the data protection reform anymore. That
so
would
given
really
the
kill them.
Snowden revelations were known at the time, and that this was part of the environment, as people involved in the drafting, the precise way that the court has interpreted the application of transfers and bringing in the application at the end of the day of the human rights law to the function of surveillance authorities in other countries. Was this actually anticipated, that this was actually the operation? I mean, it feels like, obviously we understand the language and that they, and the particular way the court has, challenged bulk surveillance and so forth, but the mechanism and the structure, it seems like there were a lot of people who maybe weren't so close to the process who look at it today and say, well, wait a second, the Commission the European Union doesn't have jurisdiction at this level, but does have the ability, because of transfers, to guarantee what is the human rights jurisprudence. Was this really fully anticipated, or should we not be sort of surprised? How much of how the application of the cross-border transfers and the relationship with surveillance was really part of the negotiation, and was this really fully anticipated?
It's a really good question, Jules, and I think certainly from my point of view, and Snowden undoubtedly was a significant event along the way, and it's certainly captured in the Democracy movie. But to some extent, there was a reaction, I think, at the instigation of the European Parliament, where what is now, I think, Article 43, the so-called anti-Pfizer clause. No, Article 47. That's right. I'm probably getting confused. I think it was Article 43 at the time, but that sort of re-emerged into the text. And the reason I say re-emerged is because I believe there was a version of that wording in a draft leaked version before the official Commission text actually came out. So, and really at the beginning of the negotiations, the member states are very precious of the national, with regards to the national security exemption, which exists in the EU treaties. And really, this was an area which they were mainly reluctant for the Commission or for the EU generally to be legislating in. But I think it forced the question, and the compromise was the insertion of that particular article into the final text. But just to sort of move away from that point, the one thing which really did concern the Council, which seemed to be the subject of interminable discussion, 2 to 3 years, was the one-stop shop. So it wasn't really about the legal and the human rights side of it, I think, from the Council point of view. It was very much about the process which underpinned this sort of piece of legislation. And because the one-stop shop was conceptually, maybe it's simple in its purest sense, but then once the argument started, it kind of got rather convoluted. I think that's a topical issue now, because we're starting to see, as the EDPB operates and has to deal with cases through the consistency mechanism, I think there's still some issues to be settled on it. So that was certainly an issue. I just want to mention one other thing about the Democracy film, was that David Burnett, the director, actually originally wanted to film the Council working group meetings, which would have maybe given it a slightly different perspective. But unfortunately, I think the rules of procedure meant that he wasn't able to do that. But I thought it was a great film, and Jan and Ralf came across really well in it.
If so, like Omer, you would have also had a cameo, obviously. Gabriela,
Yep.
Let me bring you in. You were in the process in Brussels at this time as well. What's a quick snapshot from your take? Maybe something unexpected, surprising, that wasn't, and it's never a surprise, right? Like you can't anticipate when you have a complicated text how the courts, how companies, how governments, like how it's going to live and breathe and be interpreted. But any surprises from now, several years later, from what was dry language to reality of a living document that has maybe developed in different ways than anticipated?
That's a great question. And yes, back in the day, I was at the EDPS, at European Data Protection Supervisor, part of an absolutely amazing team of data protection specialists and lawyers with Chris Doxey, with Anna Buchta, and a couple of other colleagues. We were advising ad hoc, I would say, on specific provisions, all of the institutions involved in the negotiations, so the Commission, the Parliament, the Council as well. And I remember one of the biggest efforts we made back then, which I'm not sure it had any sort of immediate practical consequence, was actually to have this table with the 3 versions in the general framework adopted by the Council, the European Parliament version, and the European Commission's initial proposal, and then language that EDPS thought would have been ideal for each of the articles. And I remember that was a huge effort for the team there. And we had some very, very interesting discussions on the theory of all of the concepts. And I think that table is still available somewhere on the website. As for surprises, for me, the biggest surprise with the GDPR was how impactful it was overall. I'm not thinking of a particular provision, but how impactful it was overall here in the US and outside in the world as well. I was very, very surprised to come here in 2016 after the adoption. And to be clear, about the end of April, if you're looking at the official title of the GDPR, it will say Regulation 2016 per 679 of 27 April 2016. That's when it was published in the official journal. So it's around this time, right? And this is why we're thinking we should celebrate 5 years from that moment.
Karolina, let me go to you quickly. Omer.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm losing the connection back and forth, but I think now it's a little bit better.
Okay, well, let me grab you while the connection is good. Omer today in the comments says, please ask Ralf and Karolina to explain the significance of London calling in the negotiations process. What's that about?
Well, London calling.
That's to Ralf,
Yeah.
Okay, Ralf.
London calling is a bar not very far from the European Parliament. And when I moved to Brussels almost 12 years ago now, we lived very close by. And the bar opened, I think, in May 2010 or so. And it was like a kind of hipster bar, I lived in Berlin for 10 years before, so it felt a bit like the closest to Berlin bars you could get in Brussels, in my neighborhood. So when they opened, we were like, okay, we need to adopt this bar, we need to become the regulars and they need to know us. And then it took 1 year of coming there regularly and becoming friends with the owners that they also finally had this drink here on the menu, which is the drink that helped us to get through the whole process, at least on our side, because it's high caffeinated iced tea. And then it became the place where basically the internet digital rights activists, EDPS colleagues, parliaments, sometimes also people from Commission and so on, used to meet regularly and discuss and chat and also become friends and very, very informally and sometimes very drunk late at night, discussing very tricky questions in the negotiation process and so on. So it's I think it has a honorable mention in one of the PhD theses that were written about data protection in recent years.
Oh, really? I didn't know that it was mentioned that. Yes. Indeed. I do not want to comment about the degree of sobriety or not, but. Indeed, that is what John also mentioned the context between people, and this is finally quite a big group, bearing in mind that this so-called DAPIX, so the group within the Council of the representatives from the member states who are discussing the issues, was fairly big, plus the Commission and of course the European Parliament. So as in all the negotiations, this human aspect and how people do get along with each other is very important. If you allow me, Jules, because I lost the connection and then we were just talking now the transfers. From what I remember about transfer, it was the first trilogue. It's where we attacked it. And actually there was this in the light, as you said it, Ralf, of this Snowden revelations. Actually, everybody was very aligned with what needs to be done and how the issue must be tackled. So, as so often, some very unhappy events are shaking us awake, and then we move a little bit more, as we did then later also with Cambridge Analytica. So, this would be to and the tables there. I must admit, Gabriela, we have more experience because we do it for each and every negotiation the Commission has on each and every act the Commission has. So the first thing we do is a table, and we always find some stagiaires who put the comparison, divide the thing, and off it goes. The fourth column with proposals is always the most important, of course.
But let me ask you this. Would one have anticipated, right? I mean, we currently have a situation where technically data transfers outside Europe to much of the world are probably illegal. If somehow somebody could do an analysis that says that, most of the surveillance authorities are not, many at least, and certainly the US. Would one have anticipated that as of passing the law, right, assuming the court cases moved quickly, the challenges happened, that passing the law immediately banned transfers? Is it a surprise, or was that even part of the conversation? Like, we're actually passing a law that, because of how it applies the Court of Human Rights standards, de facto ends data flows, that we shouldn't be surprised by the Schrems decisions in terms of, was this anticipated?
No, I mean, it doesn't immediately ban all transfers, let's say, to the US. That's also what was made clear by the court in the judgment last summer. It prevents transfers to companies in the US that fall within the scope of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. So mainly cloud providers, communication providers, and so on. But for every other transfer, if you have like a contractual necessity, if I order something in Portland, Oregon, and they need to ship it to my address in Brussels, they need, of course, my shipping address data and stuff like that. So that's still possible, also with the use of standard contract clauses. We just wanted to make clear, and maybe a bit clearer than it was before, that it's not us who ban the transfer. It's certain conditions in certain third countries that don't meet the European standards of privacy and data protection that prevent transfers. It's not us. We just are there to protect the European citizens.
Agreed.
Also, I would like to, I don't want to enter in the intricacies of Schrems 1, Schrems 2, and the reasons for the annulment of the Commission decisions, but just to underline, the GDPR is very much about promoting data flows. It's about the international outreach. And it's so the legislation as such was not conceived in a way which would prevent transfers. Just to be very clear, it's about spreading actually our standard. This is more about it, and of course about protecting, as Ralf said, about protecting the data of our our not only citizens, residents also.
Well, I, for one, welcome the pressure that it does place on surveillance authorities to open up a conversation that probably would have been under wraps. And I certainly hope that we will make some of the changes, not solely because of the European pressure, but because they're the appropriate way for governments to debate in a open sunlight way, the right level of oversight globally. And I know we're going to keep you a half an hour because it's a work day for a lot of people, and you're ending the day hopefully soon in Europe. But we wanted to bring a little bit of the memories and the message. Clearly, this could be a very long conversation. Maybe there's a democracy too that is needed to really talk about the second phase of the global impact. But really delighted. Special I Heart Privacy socks for you all, and I'll bring them over on my next trip. Hopefully we'll all be traveling and seeing each other before too long, but I thank you all for joining us. Karolina, John, Ralf, we let you finish your day, and our watches continue work, and look forward to continuing these conversations. Thanks everybody. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.